Hey folks, David Stewart here. I wanted to take a few minutes and talk today about something that I think is equally important for both writers and for musicians, and indeed for anybody that's involved in the arts, whether you're a visual artist or not, or you're a performance artist, even a dancer. And that's what I call the practice mentality or the practice mindset. And this is a mindset that I think people need to overcome in order to progress and in order to actually accomplish their goals. And what it is that you view some large amount of what you need to be doing as an artist as practice that has to be accomplished before you're allowed to work on your actual goal. You're allowed to work on the thing that actually matters to you. Whether that's a book or that's an album that you're trying to compose, or if it's a concert set you're trying to work to put together, there's this idea that you have to do a bunch of practice work before you can actually begin working on the thing you care about. And I don't think that those things are at odds. I think you can be improving yourself while you're working on the end goal, and that in fact is what you should be doing simply for efficiency's sake. That's a great approach that can be had. Now, the practice mentality or the practice mindset, the way that I see it expressed with musicians is if you ever know somebody who spends all day practicing scales, they practice all their scales, they practice all their arpeggios, they play a bunch of classical guitar etudes, and they never go out and play a concert because they don't have any concert repertoire. They work on like one or two concert repertoire pieces per semester if they're in a university. And to me, that is shooting rather low. When I actually figured out practice, by the time I figured out practice, which was towards the end of my undergraduate education, I was busting out a piece a week, right? I was working on a concert piece, a new one each week, so that within 6 months I had a whole set that I was working on perfecting. And that's because I went into every single practice session without the practice mindset. I went into it saying, I'm going to work on these specific measures of this specific piece. I'm going to learn this section of music, and I'm going to figure out all the mistakes, and I'm going to memorize these measures. And so when I left the practice room after a couple of hours, I saw myself getting closer to those goals. And that only made me want to go back into the practice room and do it again. If you go into a practice room and you just sort of goof off for 2 hours, or you practice scales and you leave and you don't feel like you're any closer to being the person you want to be, to doing the thing that you want to do, it makes you not want to continue practicing. Practicing becomes a chore. It becomes a job. And you don't want it to become a chore or a job. You want to go into the practice room thinking that I'm working towards something that I really want to work towards, and it's not going to feel like work. Classical guitar only really started to feel like work when I was having to practice things I'd done for many years and make sure that they were perfect for performance, and I wasn't working on my goals, right? I wasn't trying to attain my actual goals, and that's when it became like a job, and it probably become like a job for you. Now, for writing, it's a little bit different, and same thing for if you're like a painter or you're working with comic books. If you're working in a permanent medium rather than a performance medium like music and dance or drama, then you can have the same mentality, but it's in some cases even worse. So the practice mentality with writers is that they feel like, oh, I have to write a bunch of short stories before I'm allowed to write my novel. I have to practice some short fiction. I have to do some practice stories. I have to write some scenes. I have to go get these writing prompts off Reddit and write those for practice to get better before I'm allowed to work on my novel. I don't believe in that. And here's a way that you can easily change that so that you are improving your craft if you don't feel confident with your craft while working on your main project. And that is you take your book, and all of this should happen before you write your book. And I'll do another video on macro planning because I've been getting a lot of questions about it, and I think it's something that's really important for a writer to know. That is being an architect rather than a gardener. And if you're an architect, then this micro part was going to feel a little bit less like difficult and fluid and strange and difficult to work on. It's going to be a little bit more concrete. But take your big project that you have, your book or your comic book, and you should have all the plot worked out. You should have the setting worked out in your mind and maybe some notes on it. You should have your characters and know who they are, and then you should have your plot that's executed by your characters. Take your plot, find one scene from that plot. If you're writing a comic book, find one scene that's going to be a couple of pages or a certain number of panels that you're going to write, or that you're going to draw and write. And take that scene and write it. Write the prose. Write what happens. You say, Billy walked into the store and his eye caught upon a magazine of a scantily clad woman and impulsively picked up, right? You can begin just describing the way the scene works, right? Prose is not, it's both more complicated and not as complicated as people think. And one of the problems with teaching writing, especially on this kind of permanent medium, without me looking at your book, is that like prose is, there's a competition between the macro, like writing the entire story, which is, I could tell you kind of some things that work, and then writing prose, which is like you have to actually look at the micro, the sentences that you've written, and say, well, this is not the best way to do it, and it's figuring out the connection between what you envision in your mind and how the words go on the page. And you kind of have to practice to do it, but this is, I think, the way that you could practice to do it, which is write that scene, write it out in its totality, write all the dialogue, take the scene. You've accomplished something that's moving you closer to your goal of completing your book. Take your scene, hand it to somebody who's willing to read it to you and likes that kind of story. Like, so if you're writing a fantasy novel, hand it to a friend who reads fantasy. Be like, here's a scene from a new book. Can you just tell me what you think and maybe point out some things that suck? And that usually any person's going to point out typos, and you'll be aware of like grammar mistakes that you may not be aware that you made. And everyone makes typos. It has to do with the disconnect between what our minds memorize and what they put on the page. Sometimes your brain will actually autocorrect mistakes that you've written and you literally won't see them. But anyway, he'll point out grammar mistakes, and then he'll give you a couple tidbits that I think are important, which is like, I don't understand what this is, or what is this referencing, or I don't like this piece of dialogue, or this guy's, I think this dialogue is really hammy. They'll start to give some feedback, and anybody, even if they're not a writer, they can give some basic feedback about whether they like it, whether that scene makes them want to keep reading the story or whatnot. And so you take that feedback and you go back, and then you do the process of revision. You revise that one scene. You go down on the micro level, you fix all the dialogue, you reread it, you rewrite anything that you think doesn't work, and you fix any kind of mistakes that are there. Then you have a completed scene. Now, it's not that that's going to be the best way that you could ever write that scene, but you have a scene that's completed. Then you can move on to the next one. And whether you work linearly, starting at the beginning of the book and going to the end, which is how I always work, other people kind of go and do scenes out of order. And if that works for you, that works for you. If you've planned the macro really well, you can do any scene in any order you want. In fact, I know a lot of screenwriters that do that. And actually, as a screenwriter, I've done that to a certain extent, is kind of written scenes out of order, depending on what me and my screenwriting partner had in mind. So you can do that. And then you work on the next scene and you repeat that process. And if you can, give it to as many people as are willing to read it and give you a little bit of feedback on what it means to them. And then you'll go back and do that revision process. And eventually, if you keep repeating this, you're going to keep wanting to come back into your word processor and write, because you feel that bar filling up. It's like your experience bar filling up. When you get to the end of the book and you write the end, it's like, boom, you've leveled up. Then you get to do like the next level of writing, which is worrying about the revision and the structure and seeing how things work and those sorts of things. But learning that micro part, the prose, you can only do that by writing prose. But I don't think that you should have the practice mentality when you're learning to write prose. You should try to be working on a project that you care about, regardless of the length of the fiction. If it's a full novel, most people want to write novels because that's what they read. If it's a short story, that's fine too. I write some short fiction. I write mostly long fiction because that's what I prefer to read, and that's what's most satisfying for me to read. But I do read short fiction from time to time, so it's not like I'm completely out of sorts. If you're a person that never reads short fiction and you want to practice short fiction in order to prepare yourself for writing a novel, it's not going to work out. Partly because you're not going to know what makes a good short story. But more than that, you won't be accomplishing your goals, so you'll always feel like you're an infant in the writing business versus moving towards being a professional. Once you finish that book and you can put it out and maybe even publish it, then all of a sudden, like your mental gains are going to increase a lot because you're going to have that correct mentality. You're going to have overcome the practice mindset, and you're going to be thinking like an entrepreneur. You're going to be thinking like a real artist, which is that you are working towards your end goals. You're working towards your end product and thinking about how it's going to work for for your audience, for a person who comes and looks at your painting. If you're drawing a painting, you're going to be thinking about all those things, and that's what's really going to make you enjoy this process. So I hope that has been interesting, and those tips will be useful for you both as a musician and as a writer, of which I am both, as you can tell from the guitars in the background. Just as a little heads up, my little samurai fiction novel here, Muramasa Blood Drinker, will be available free on Amazon Saturday and Sunday of this week. That's going to be the 26th and 27th of August 2017. So grab them. Links will be down below. I'll probably have them in the description and in a comment. So grab this book. It's going to be free. It's normally $2.99 as an ebook and $13.99 as the paperback. Paperback obviously is not free. If you do buy the paperback, you get the ebook for free as well. I'm very, very proud of this book. I did a lot of research to make sure it was a well-written book, and I applied this process to this book as well. And I'll actually talk about some of the ways that I worked on writing this book in another video that I think might be helpful for people to overcome sort of the doldrums that come with being a perfectionist, of which I am a little bit. So anyway, get this one for free. If you already have that one, please feel free to check out my fantasy book, Water of Awakening. It's 99 cents on Amazon right now. So go ahead and grab it, and it's $9.99 for the paperback, which I worked really hard to design, and I think came out as a good product. So check those out, and you can also get for free Garamesh and the Farmer, my little fairy tale, which is a fun little book too, and these two kind of go together in a way that you may not know until you read both of them. So you guys have a great day. Please leave me your comments down below and let me know what you think and what works for you. If you have an approach, if you have a mindset that helps you to work, then share that with others and share that with me so that I can help myself get better too. It's always an ongoing conversation. So have a great one, and I will see you guys next time.